Thank you all for joining us today. I'm sorry that we're starting slightly late. We had a little bit of a technical hiccup, but thank you all for being here. So just to let you guys know about the structure of what's going to be happening today, is we've broken this webinar down into 4 sections. So the first section will be covered by me. I'll be speaking for about kind of 10 to 15 minutes on what we've seen in the first 4 weeks of the Procurement Act. So we're going to be taking a look at what contracting authorities are publishing, which of the new notice types we're starting to see, and also kind of delving into those procedure types. I'm Ben, I'm a marketing executive at Tussell, but I also worked in customer success here for a couple of years. And so we're going to kind of dive into some ways suppliers can make use of the changes. We are also joined by the CMA and by the Cabinet Office today. So we've got Deborah Wilkie from the CMA. Thank you so much for being here. Deborah's going to talk after me a little bit about the new supplier exclusion and debarment regime, and kind of go into how can suppliers avoid exclusion and a few other fun bits. And then we've got Sam Russell from the Cabinet Office, who will be joining us. He's having a few technical difficulties at the moment, but he should be able to join us. And he's going to talk about kind of more broadly the Procurement Act, some stuff on open frameworks, KPIs, the central digital platform, and the actions you can kind of take right now to make the most of all these changes. And then the final section of today's webinar will be focused on answering your questions. So some of you might have submitted some questions to us ahead of time. Thank you for doing so. We will answer some of those, and then we're going to also open it up to the Q&A and allow you to kind of ask your questions directly. We might not be able to get to everyone's questions, but if we don't, then please just give me an email afterwards, and we'll try and answer your questions. Okay, well, I am going to share my screen. Okay, so thank you for joining us, everyone. I'm going to take us through the first bit of this webinar, and that's looking at the data of what we've seen in the first 4 weeks since the Procurement Act's gone live. As I say, I'm Ben, I'm a marketing executive at Tussell. I used to work in customer success. And so we're going to kind of take a look at actually how can we action what we know about how the Procurement Act's being used. I won't go into it too much, but just a little bit about what Tussell is and what our data is all about. We are the market's trusted source of public sector procurement data. So some of our customers include Microsoft, Capita, and the majority of the strategic suppliers. We also have kind of quite a lot of SMEs, VCSEs, and government public sector organizations and procurement teams that use our data to kind of make informed decisions about doing smarter procurement or how to sell more to the public sector. We've also been cited by several kind of large media organizations. So the way that Tussell works is we collect data from every kind of large public sector portal. We also collect information on invoices. So that's kind of data on what the public sector is actually spending money on, not just what contracts they're signing. Then we clean that data, we mix it with other third-party data from Moody's and Companies House, and then we cleanse it with machine learning and also with a kind of diligent data team who go in and make sure that we've got the best data there is. So I'm going to take us through what we've seen in the first 4 weeks since the Procurement Act went live. So this slide is showing tender notices and future opportunity notices in the lead up to the Procurement Act go live date, and also in the weeks since. So future opportunity notices are what you might call planned procurement notices or preliminary market engagement notices. And we can see that before the Procurement Act, there was a huge rise in the number of particularly tender notices, although also kind of PME notices being published. And that fell off massively after the Act went live. We've seen this across all buyer types, from local government, central government, NHS, education. And we kind of know that there was quite a lot of trepidation about the Act. Now, the interesting thing about this graph to me is the resurgence we've seen already in those future opportunity notices. So unlike tender notices, which have yet to properly bounce back, we've already seen the number of weekly future opportunity notices bounce back to pre-Procurement Act levels, which to me is a really strong predictor that those preliminary market engagement notices are going to be used a lot more than they were before the Act went live. So for buyers, if you're not already using these future opportunity notices, they are a really good way of fostering innovation. And they're a really good way of inviting SMEs and VCSEs to participate in the pre-procurement, in the kind of formation of that tender. And that can be really helpful in getting them involved earlier. So now taking a look at which kinds of which kinds of procedure types are being used most now that the Act has gone live. Now, at first glance, it really seems that kind of pre-existing procedure types are being used much more than the new ones. So we've got the new competitive flexible procedure, which initially there was some thought that government accounts might be quite scared of using. But actually, when it comes to above threshold contracts or above threshold procurements, so that's anything, we're looking at those three procedure types in the middle with that green bracket, we can see that actually 23% of above threshold notices under the Procurement Act so far are using the competitive flexible procedure. Well, so what does that mean? It means that if you are a supplier, you really need to be vigilant when you're reading through those tender documents, because that's going to tell you exactly what stages that procedure is going to take. That's important so that you can kind of make the right bid, no bid decisions, and so that you know how that procurement is going to work before you start investing resources. If you're a buyer and you're not already using the competitive flexible procedure, I would really suggest looking into it. As I say, over a quarter of new Procurement Act notices are for contracts that are going via that procedure type. It really does allow you to measure things that are important to your constituency, to your procurement, that matter to your population. It also allows for lots of other great things like negotiation, if that's something that you're interested in adding into your procurement process. So we have 17 new notices under the Procurement Act, and though not all of these are currently live, we do see that many of them are already being published. What I would kind of draw attention to specifically here is the number of UK2 notices, so that's preliminary market engagement notices being published. For suppliers, I would really recommend not waiting until a tender is published to get involved in the procurement. That should not be the first point of contact. If you can get involved at that preliminary market engagement stage, then you can have a role in shaping the tender, and you can have a role, if you're a small business, in making sure that the tender is actually going to be accessible and winnable for businesses of your size. We also see lots of UK 6 and UK 7 notices already being published. So that's award notices and contract detail notices. Now, given that the Act has only been live for a month, that is quite surprising. Normally, we would expect at least a 25-day tendering period. So the fact that we've already seen so many of them is quite surprising. Now, we do know that there have been a few kind of teething issues in the way that buyers have been publishing. So that might kind of explain some of it. And the other explanation here is that we did see an influx of tenders before the Procurement Act go live date that did say that they would be using the Procurement Act rather than the public contract regulations in that procurement. What I'd like to draw your attention to most here, though, is these new UK 13 and UK 14 notices. We are already seeing the formation of dynamic markets. That's something I would really keep an eye out for if you are a smaller supplier. Traditional closed frameworks, you can only join at the beginning, and that can make them quite hard if you only qualify midway through the framework term. Dynamic markets you can join at any point. So that really does make them more accessible for scaling businesses, VCSEs, SMEs, new businesses. One really exciting aspect of the Procurement Act is the ability for buyers to reserve procurements for SMEs, VCSEs, or local businesses. So what we can see here is that so far, 1 in 5 Procurement Act notices are for procurements that have been reserved, 5% of Procurement Act notices are for procurements that have been reserved only for SMEs and VCSEs. This is really handy and should help to address the problems with the kind of perceived lack of opportunities for SMEs in the public sector, particularly when it comes to doing direct business. PPN 001 has laid out that central government will have to create new goals for direct SME and VCSE procurements. So if you're not already doing it, this is a great way of making sure that you are procuring more directly with SMEs and VCSEs. I would suggest looking out for our upcoming local government social value procurement index. If you're a local government, that's going to show you and kind of rank you, give you a score on how much you're procuring with SMEs and VCSEs. We've also got an upcoming report with the British Chambers of Commerce. And that's going to be kind of looking more at central government. We can see as well that 2% of notices under the Procurement Act so far are for procurements that are reserved specifically for local businesses. This is also something I would look out for, particularly if you're a smaller localized supplier. Particularly local governments generally have higher rates of procurement with local businesses. So that's something to look out for. Finally, what we've got here is a list of some dynamic markets that are coming up that are kind of going to open up soon. If you are a buyer and you're interested in opening up a dynamic market, I'd really suggest it. It's something worth looking at. They really can be helpful for small businesses, new businesses, VCSEs. They can also be really helpful for kind of fostering innovation because you allow new suppliers to join regularly. So particularly in kind of rapidly evolving markets like tech, this can be really useful. Feel free to reach out to any of these buyers. I think we can kind of be collaborative about this. If you're kind of worried about how to set one up, why not reach out to one of these buyers and ask. If you're a supplier, keep an eye out for upcoming dynamic markets that you might want to join. I'd also recommend you use a tool like Tussell or kind of do your own research to take a look at not only what dynamic markets, what open frameworks, what frameworks are coming up, but also which ones are actually being used to award work to SMEs. That is something you can do in the Tussell tool, and I'd kind of really suggest taking a look at. Deborah, I'll pass over to you for now. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Ben. And I'll let you put up my slides. But good afternoon, everyone. So as Ben said, my name's Deborah Wilkie. I'm a director at the Competition and Markets Authority, and my role there is to investigate and stop anti-competitive business practices that can harm public and private sector bodies and the economy at large. I've also been working on the CMA's for the new Procurement Act, working with colleagues in the Cabinet Office on the new competition law debarment regime, which I'm going to talk more about today. So my key message for you today is that with the new Act now in force, for the first time, suppliers that are found to have taken part in anti-competitive cartel conduct by colluding with competitors may face compulsory debarment or exclusion from public procurement contracts for up to 5 years. So this is high stakes stuff. We've gone from a very broad overview point. So we're drilling now, and we've called it a deep dive. What I'm going to do in the next 10 or so minutes is just to explain to you what might anti-competitive behaviour look like in public procurement and why stopping it matters. And that will include the serious consequences for suppliers who have been involved in anti-competitive activity, which now includes that mandatory exclusion from public procurement work. And I'm also going to give some key takeaways for suppliers and what you should do if you do think you might have taken part in a competition law breach. So Ben, if we could move on to the next slide. First, I thought I'd give a very quick introduction to the Competition and Markets Authority. So we are the UK's competition and consumer protection watchdog, with an overall focus on driving innovation, productivity and growth by promoting competition for the benefit of people, businesses and the UK economy. And as part of this, we tackle unfair business behaviour in a number of ways. And that's to ensure fair dealing businesses can compete and thrive on a level playing field, as I've set out on this slide. Today, I will focus on the work we do in cartel enforcement and explain how our work relates to public sector procurement. So protecting public sector contracts and helping ensure fair dealing businesses aren't being held back by anti-competitive behaviour. So I've talked about cartels, but what are they? Put very simply, business cartels are anti-competitive agreements between businesses who should be competing with each other, but instead they're getting together to rig the market in their favour. So ripping off customers, often forcing them to pay higher prices for poorer quality goods and services and restricting choice. In the context of public sector procurement, the victim here is the procuring authority and ultimately the taxpayer, as well as fair dealing businesses that are deprived of that level playing field to compete. So cartel conduct can take a number of forms. For example, that might mean competitors fixing prices, sharing out the market between each other, or agreeing to limit production levels. But today I'm going to touch on bid rigging. So if we move on to the next slide, Ben. So I'm going to talk about bid rigging and public procurement. As you are all no doubt aware, public procurement in this country is very economically significant. The UK spends more than 300 billion a year on public procurement. However, these processes can be vulnerable to anti-competitive practices like bid rigging. And research shows us that where that type of bid rigging is present, prices can go up on average by 20%, ultimately costing taxpayers more. So as you'll see on the slide, bid rigging can come in a variety of forms, all designed to manipulate the tender process for a supplier's benefit. And it's really important for businesses to know what these competition's red lines are and to not engage in these practices. I've talked about that level playing field, but also there can be really serious consequences for suppliers, including big fines, and that could be up to 10% of your worldwide turnover, disqualification of directors, reputational harm, damages claims from victims, and now exclusion or debarment from public procurement work. So some of the most common bid rigging activities, which can occur together, are set out on this slide. And I'm not going to attempt to go through them in detail today, but I will point you to where you can find out more later at the end of my brief presentation, where I'll signpost to some CMA accessible resources. We're really keen to help businesses understand where those red lines are. So we've produced some really great materials, which I'll point you to. So coming on to, I guess, the meat of my presentation. Thanks, Ben. So when will exclusion and debarment for cartel activity apply? So you may know that Procurement Act has really introduced stronger rules on exclusion. So now suppliers who take part in illegal cartel activity, so by that I mean bid rigging, price fixing, or sharing out markets, those type of suppliers risk mandatory exclusion by a contracting authority from individual public procurements. And they also risk being included on the central debarment list that's now run by the Cabinet Office. And that could result in them automatically being excluded from all public procurement contracts for up to 5 years. So the regime is now live. That debarment list is now available on gov.uk. Oh, my lights have gone off. And you can reach it from the procurement review landing page. So I'll come back and touch on that briefly. I should say there are no companies on there as yet. The regime has just gone live, so I have no news there to share yet. So when will mandatory exclusion apply? Well, that's when a supplier has been found either by the CMA or another regulator to have broken competition law by taking part in cartel activity, or if an individual's been convicted of the criminal cartel offence under the Enterprise Act, and the circumstances giving rise to the exclusion ground are continuing or likely to occur again. And this part will be assessed either by the contracting authority, where we're looking at exclusion from a particular public procurement, or by the minister in the case of potential debarment, so being placed on that central list. So this new regime applies to cartel infringement decisions imposed up to 3 years before the Act came into force. So suppliers will probably need to disclose any cartel fines they've been subject to in the last 3 years as part of contracting authorities' assessments. And contracting authorities have a duty to consider both mandatory and discretionary exclusion grounds before each procurement exercise. So this is something that contracting authorities will be thinking about in every procurement that takes place. So next slide. What advice can I give to suppliers on avoiding exclusions? Well, I guess the best way to avoid debarment is to remain compliant with competition law. And I put some points there. Ensure your staff are clear on the law. Have a compliance culture which is led from the top. It's really important that suppliers also consider subcontractors carefully, because these exclusions will also apply to a supplier's subcontractors or any person associated with or connected with the supplier. So that's something else that you will have to start considering very carefully under this new regime. So what do you do if a supplier is found to have infringed competition law? There are still opportunities to avoid exclusion from bidding for public procurement contracts. And the first is one of my key takeaways, actually, and that is to be the first to confess any wrongdoing to the CMA. So there is now an even greater incentive for businesses who have been involved in cartel activity to be the first to report wrongdoing to us at the CMA. And that's because those that are the first to report under our leniency policy can actually avoid exclusion and debarment on competition law grounds. So you can find out more about the CMA's leniency policy via the QR code on the slide, and that will take you to the relevant pages on gov.uk. But I would say do also keep an eye out for updates to our leniency guidance, which will be going out soon for consultation. And that updated guidance will cover more about leniency and its interaction with debarment and exclusions under the new Procurement Act. And at the same time, we're going to be sharing some user-friendly quick guides. So I'm conscious I'm talking about some very technical legislation here, some very technical policies. So we are really keen at the CMA to be producing some kind of business-friendly quick guides as well. But it is really important to understand, if you have been involved in unlawful discussions with your competitors, only the first one in will be exempt from debarment. So don't wait until someone else blows the whistle, because you will then be too late to benefit from that very valuable protection. So the other way to avoid exclusion, if you are a supplier who has been found to have broken the law, is by self-cleaning. And by that, I mean suppliers who've engaged in cartel activity but who don't benefit from immunity, they can avoid exclusion or debarment on competition law grounds if they can demonstrate, and that's to the satisfaction either of the contracting authority or the minister in the case of potential debarment, that they have self-cleaned. And that basically means that you've managed to persuade that decision maker that the circumstances giving rise to the application of the exclusion ground are not continuing or likely to occur again. And there we would be thinking about, what kind of compliance programs have you put in place? Have you demonstrated that you've understood what has gone wrong and that you've changed your ways? So where can you find out more about competition law, about some of these points? Ben, if we scroll through to the next slide. As I've said, at the CMA, we've tried to produce some really business-friendly advice, and that's available on our Cheating or Competing campaign page. So there's a QR code there as well. We've included there some free e-learning modules. There's explainer films, quick guides, and case studies to help businesses understand how to stay compliant, and also for procurers how to detect and deter and report illegal anti-competitive practices in procurement to us. So I would highly recommend taking a look at those. Also, with the regime going live, we've also published a debarment blog in the same week that the regime went live, and that was to help suppliers and contractors understand what the new Procurement Act means for them. Again, that's all accessible on our web pages, and you can also find out more on the detail of exclusions and debarment. And I should say competition law grounds are just one ground of many, and there's more detail on those in the short guidance documents which have been published by the Cabinet Office already. And then finally, it also went live on the go live date of the new legislation. The new procurement review unit has a really useful landing page on gov.uk. So you can find there links to all of the Cabinet Office guidance, and you can also find a link to that debarment list itself. So on the next slide, I guess my final plea would be, it's really important for you to know how you report either suspicions to us or if you think you've been involved in wrongdoing. So please do contact us if you've got suspicions in relation to any of your contracts. Our door is definitely open. As I mentioned, if you have been involved in illegal cartel activity with competitors, so if you have been involved in discussing prices or some of that cover pricing or bid rigging that I mentioned, only the first one in to blow the whistle to us is going to benefit from that exemption from exclusion and debarment on competition law grounds. We do take all suspicions seriously, and we have some strong powers of investigation to take action. So I've shared there our reporting number for our cartels hotline. Do call us 0203 738 6888, or we have a dedicated email, cartelshotline@cma.gov.uk. And for more general advice about procurement, and that's particularly for contracting authorities, please do contact us via our procurement support email. So I'm conscious that's quite a whistle-stop tour through. We may have time for questions at the end, but otherwise, well, Ben, I was going to hand over to you, but I'm hoping we might have Sam from the Cabinet Office to hand over to.
Sam, are you with us?
Testing. Am I coming through clear?
Hey.
That's fantastic. So, apologies, folks. It was working my end, but there must have been an interface. So I jumped into another room and I'm back. But yeah, I take it you can hear me. You might be wishing that you can't hear me by the end of the presentation, but that's all. Yeah, with the smiles. I just want to say thank you so much for everyone for joining. I know you're all super busy. There's tons going on at the moment in the current climate. But thank you so much for dedicating that time, and I hope this is useful. As Ben gets up the slides, I want to say that I'm a sort of senior policy lead on the Procurement Act. So I cover about 15 sections in the sort of 120 section piece of legislation. I've been part of the Procurement Act full time since before its introduction back in kind of May 2022. So one might say a seasoned veteran when it comes to kind of procurement regulations, legislation, probably engaged with 1,000+ different suppliers and buyers. And it's not often you might hear excitement and procurement in the same sentence, but I definitely think this is a really exciting time for procurement. Not only will public sector buyers be operating under a kind of new regime and will go on to what I perceive as the benefits of that. But also we've had a national procurement policy statement published by the new government in the last month or so. This essentially lays out their priorities of how they want procurement to help drive forward their missions for the UK. And again, with all my engagements, I've seen a real kind of cultural shift, and I hope that kind of filters out into the procurements that you're working on. What I'm going to try and do is just give a bit of an overview. I think you've had two incredible kind of like magnified kind of close-ups on the new regime, both from a kind of transparency side of what sort of notices are being published, and the notices are essentially the procurement people or buyers saying, here's the opportunity, here's what we're doing, get involved, whether it be from preliminary market engagement to a kind of framework or tender. And also you've been able to see from the CMA side some of the things we've been doing to improve and strengthen our exclusions regime. Delivering value for money is at the heart of everything we do, but we absolutely are committed to excluding those suppliers who are unfit for public contracts or pose risks. And yeah, competition offences is part of kind of many of the things we've done in that space. But let me dive in. Next slide, please, Ben. And yeah, amazing for those who put questions in. Continue to put the questions in. My favourite part of these sessions are always a Q&A, so do go ahead and I'll try and answer as much as I can. The key aims of the kind of Transforming Public Procurement Programme. If you're not aware, in the past, the UK's procurement rules derived from EU procurement rules, and kind of post-EU exit, there was an opportunity to design a kind of legislative sort of regime specific to the UK. That's what we've kind of done, and we've focused around a series of different aims to create a simpler, more efficient system, opening up procurement to smaller businesses and new entrants, driving better value for money, talked a little bit about banning those who pose unacceptable risks, increasing transparency, not just transparency about contracts that are coming up, but all the way through the life cycle. So on one of the graphs that Ben shared, in the future, you'll be able to see the different contracts that have been modified during their kind of contract term, and when those contracts have ended, which I think would be kind of really helpful to sort of get the kind of literally start to finish book of contracting. And yeah, really trying to drive innovation and kind of maximize social value through the contracts. One of the things we've done in the kind of Procurement Act is to be very clear that when buyers look at assessing tenders, they don't have to just go for lowest price. They can go for the most advantageous tender, which might incorporate various parts of social value. And just to kind of sort of technical points, Procurement Act applies to kind of UK government, English, Welsh, and kind of Northern Irish authorities, and that's kind of the scope of the rules. There's a whole lot of rules and kind of thresholds that different ones apply to ensure it's proportionate, and there's a series of different schedules which might kind of outline where certain contracts are outside the rules, whether it's for national security or for good reason. So that's kind of the structure of it. If we go to the next slide, we can look at the journey so far. And this slide, I really want to just try and say that we've really undergone a kind of huge engagement process to get here. This hasn't been something that myself and a kind of few bods have gone into a room in the middle of nowhere and sort of designed up. We've really gone through a quite considerable period of engagement from what we call a green paper, which is essentially a long document outlining what we'd like to achieve. We sort of published that out in 2020 and listed a number of questions, had over 600 responses from across public sector, suppliers, challenging, encouraging, endorsing, suggesting various different proposals. We've introduced the procurement bill into Parliament, and probably should have calculated the number of hours, but we not only spent hours, but I think when you total them up, days in Parliament as kind of parliamentarians went through the bill almost line by line, looking at very technical points to do with how frameworks might work, all the way to the kind of big geostrategic kind of principles that we want procurement. Should we be contracting with this type of supplier or not? And so, yeah, we got royal assent and then brought forward kind of additional legislation to give details of some of those kind of procurement notices and some of the different technical aspects. And you'll notice that there's a bit of a gap between getting royal assent, should be 2023 rather than 2022, and actually kind of go live in February 2025. And the kind of reason for that is we wanted public sector and also suppliers like yourselves to get used to the new rules before we turned on. We didn't want just a big bang, we wanted people to start getting used to them. And as you can probably see on the graphs that Ben shared, a number of authorities are still planning their procurements, released a whole load before the Act went live, and yeah, we'll be looking to do more so So that's kind of where we've gone. I've mentioned the National Procurement Policy Statement. If you're looking to contract with public sector, it's well worth a read. It's just a few pages. It gets a bit of a flavour about the type of things that we want in government to sort of flow through to buyers, whether that be local authorities, schools, hospitals, or Cabinet Office or the central gov departments. Next slide, please, Ben. And we've got a number of different kind of changes that we've made. I talked about the aims before. What I'll try not to do is go through these in great detail because you can find them on our Transforming Public Procurement landing page. But as part of our drive to open up procurement, increase transparency, we've now kind of mandated for larger contracting authorities or buyers to publish pipeline notices of the different procurements that are going to be coming up over the next 18 months. So if you're a smaller buyer, you can look at these and start to prepare way in advance of when you might get a sort of tender notice and X number of kind of days or months to turn around a bid. We've tried to increase the flexibility in procurement. So before there was about sort of 7 different kind of procedures that buyers would have to go through that had quite kind of strict rules behind them. Now we've essentially just got 3, which is a kind of open procedure, which is issue a tender, get all the responses back, make the award. Very straightforward. We've got direct awards, as we've said, for kind of limited circumstances. But then the kind of other kind of bucket is what we call in the competitive flexible procedure, where buyers can design their procedure to best suit the procurement. They've got a huge amount of flexibility how they do that, whether that's with different negotiation stages, demonstrations, site visits, presentations from suppliers. And we're really kind of keen for this to be used where it's sensible and practical. And so during any of your preliminary market engagement with any buyers, do be suggesting what you found works in kind of an industry context or a non-public sector context, and be encouraging buyers to make use of these new flexibilities. We've talked a little bit about exclusions and debarment. So exclusions as a sort of term applies to local decisions that are made on a procurement by procurement basis. And debarment is a kind of central government block list, which Cabinet Office ourselves will investigate. Deborah was right, we've not got any suppliers on there now because you have to do a formal investigation, but our kind of Minister in government did kind of in a statement to Parliament say that we are looking at investigating a series of suppliers who may be involved in kind of misconduct. Now, if you're a good corporate citizen, you should be encouraged by this new regime because you'll have nothing to worry about. And also you should be encouraged that we're not going to be looking over you for suppliers who are posing risks for misconduct or competition offences, etc. Finally, yes, supplier feedback. We are looking to really improve the feedback suppliers get, particularly those who are unsuccessful in the process. And hopefully you can see through these that we're really keen that buyers and suppliers are engaging well and communicating well between one another. Next slide, please, Ben. Thank you. I'll just pick on a couple of things here. One of the things we've introduced is an open framework. So many of you who are bidding in public sector contracts will have heard of Crowd Commercial Service and the different frameworks. These are essentially for common goods and services. And once the tender goes out, suppliers join the framework and then future procurement opportunities happen within that framework. One of the things we found though is that once the framework's been opened, it might last for 4 years and a couple of extension years. So it can kind of create a little bit of lock-in. And so we've introduced this concept of open frameworks where the frameworks must be opened. And if you're a SME, you can look at some of the data that Ben's been talking about and see which frameworks are being used, when the next opened up, get on there next time and get involved in the opportunities. A few other things we've done, again, you can find out more on our kind of webpage. Next slide, please, Ben. And a big part of the new regime is the central digital platform. This is find a tender service, kind of enhanced if you like. And as part of this service, you will be able to see all the different notices from the current regime and also be able to sign in and put your supplier information in there. This is your kind of basic information about your kind of name, address, who your directors are, some connected persons, and also completed declarations on your exclusions. Have you been guilty of any of these things? Yes or no? If yes, please provide some details. And once you've done that, if you're bidding for an opportunity, you can share that package with the buyer. So in theory, you'll be able to only, well, sorry, in theory, you only need to provide it once. Online, we do have tons of different guidance documents, fact sheets, there's a whole load of videos about the platform. So if you are struggling to register, do have a look in there. Have a look at our mailbox page. It's all on there. And again, don't even have to register to just go on Find a Tender Service and have a look at what opportunities are coming up. You can search by the different fields and see which ones apply to you. I think that's probably a good time then, I think, to open up to Q&A perhaps. I hope, try to move quick so to have the chance. Again, kind of highlighted the different things you can do now. But yeah, I really want to kind of make sure we kind of answer some of the questions that you've asked.
Yeah, let me take a look through the Q&A. In the meantime, I will fire some questions at both of you, if that's all right, that we had in the sign-up forms. So whoever wants to can take them, but I think probably I've got a couple for you, Sam, first. We've got some people wondering how the Procurement Act affects existing frameworks.
Yeah, it's a great question. I kind of said earlier we were quite keen to avoid a big bang approach. And so what we've done is implemented a transitional arrangement, which essentially means that any contracts that were signed before February the 25th, 2025, they continue under the old regime. So we don't apply new rules to them, that continues under the old rules. Similarly, any frameworks that were set up so the 25th, before the 24th of February, they will continue under the old regime. So if you've got any Crown Commercial Service frameworks or any frameworks from other providers that were set up before the new regime goes live, all those call-offs will also be under the old regime.
Thank you. We've got a question here asking, will there still be both the Find a Tender Service and Contracts Finder?
Yeah, it's a good question. So Contracts Finder, a little bit like Find a Tender Service, shows various different procurement opportunities. Because of this transitional arrangement, Contracts Finder will remain live for the time being, but it's probably going to be more a case of people publishing confirmation that they've signed contracts rather than new contracts, which will be increasingly in Find a Tender Service. So if I was a supplier, it might be worth just being registered to both, getting alerts from both, just for the next foreseeable future, but eventually it'll be kind of shifting over to Find a Tender Service.
Brilliant, thank you, Sam. Or you could just join Tussell. We have a question for Deborah. Are suppliers able to check the debarment list, and where would they find that?
So they can, as I said, it's now up and live, very exciting. So that was published on day one, if you like. It's still empty. Frankly, you can just put it into your search box and it will find it pretty much straight away. I don't know how you've managed to do that, but that works great. I also get to it really easily through the Procurement Review Unit landing page. So that's kind of my go-to spot for everything to do with debarment. But yeah, my understanding is that is always going to be kept up to date. So that's your official place to look for whether a supplier has actually been debarred.
Thanks, Deborah. We've got another question here asking, will bid rigging offenders over the last 3 years or so automatically be put on the debarment list, or is this just for kind of from now on?
Yeah, so I guess the regime does look back slightly, but for the past 3 years. But debarment itself, there's a whole process around it. So there will be an investigation. If you are under investigation, you'll be notified by that. So that's what the new service within the Cabinet Office will be running. So if you are a supplier that is under investigation, you'll receive notice of that and have an opportunity to sort of provide reps through that process. If you are somebody that has been found to have been involved in cartel activity, you will then still have the opportunity to explain why you have self-cleaned, as I explained. So that is a way to avoid debarment, is to make sure that you've put your house in order, that you've shown that you know how to comply with competition law, or if it relates to another offence, that you've really sort of changed your ways and you can put forward evidence to that to the decision maker for debarment.
Thanks, Deborah. Sam, maybe this one's more for you. This one's one of the ones that we got asked in the sign-up form. With an increased focus on social value, is there a risk that SMEs will be disadvantaged if they're not able to evidence the same level of social value that larger suppliers might be able to evidence?
The previous government and the new government have absolutely been committed to improving the access to contracts for small businesses. If you look at the National Procurement Policy Statement, you'll see there's kind of real strong commitment to drive growth through SMEs, new entrants. There's a kind of section in the Act which talks about, well, it's not really talks about, it kind of outlines a legal duty on all buyers to have regard to small businesses. Any social value criteria must be kind of within that kind of framework. Might also be looking at the procurement policy notice on social value. Again, that talks a lot about how we can kind of incorporate that in a way that doesn't kind of unintentionally advantage larger suppliers. So could there be issues? Potentially, but I think there's some strong mitigations already in place. I should say as well, if you think there are kind of issues around barriers being in place for small businesses, do contact the procurement review unit. You can go away and speak to that contracting authority, look into it. So if you do come up or come across those, do engage and yeah, let us know.
Thank you. On the question of small businesses, once again, and working with regional suppliers as well, it's great to see that contracting authorities can make procurements only available to local suppliers now. Is that is correct? We've got a question asking, can local authorities use tools like LM3 to make sure that supplier respend is also happening within local communities?
Happy to take a first punt. Probably won't be able to answer the LM3 without a bit more context, but I think one important thing to say there is with local government, our intention is always to disapply. Again, this is quite sort of legal kind of text and what have you in detail, but our intention has always been to allow local authorities and all contracting authorities to reserve below threshold contracts to local suppliers. You can see that in the Act and all the kind of ancillary documentation. We're still trying to work through the right legal vehicle to disapply Section 17 of the Local Government Act. So yeah, keep your eyes open for that. So that's something we're still committed to doing and still working on.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sam. Deborah, I've got another one for you, if that's all right. I've got a question asking what the difference is between mandatory and discretionary exclusion.
Okay, so this one also starts to get a bit more technical. So before I start, there's a brief plug for our blog, because from that, some of this technical detail, we've tried to break it down into something that's manageable. So hopefully you'll be able to circulate it after the call, but do have a look at our blog. But in brief, there are two types of competition law exclusions that can occur under the new Act. Mandatory, and those grounds are set out in Schedule 6 of the Act, and discretionary, which are set out in a separate Schedule 7 of the Act. So mandatory exclusion applies when a supplier has actually been found by the CMA or another regulator to have broken competition law, or as I said, the criminal cartel offence has been committed, and the circumstances giving rise to that exclusion ground are continuing or likely to occur again. So if you're in that mandatory exclusion ground, or if you're on the debarment register for a mandatory exclusion ground, contracting authorities must exclude you from a procurement. Discretionary exclusion, that applies if a contracting authority or the minister considers that a supplier has been involved in cartel activity or another type of competition law infringement. So there hasn't actually been a published decision in that case, but also the same circumstances giving rise to that ground are continuing or likely to occur again. And if you're in that discretionary exclusion ground, or again, if you're on the debarment register for a discretionary exclusion ground, then contracting authorities may exclude it from a procurement, but they don't have to. And my final plug would be, as a reminder, a supplier won't be excluded either for a mandatory or a discretionary ground if it's been the first to blow the whistle, come into us, and it's an immunity recipient. So again, as a reminder, if you have been involved, be the first to come into us before we come knocking on your door.
Thanks, Deborah. We only have a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to try and do a few more questions. We did have 50 questions sent to us ahead of time in those sign-up forms, so I'm sorry if we don't get to everyone. Sam, this one is for you. It's about pipeline notices. Do you know when we're going to expect to see them? And also, how accurate can we expect them to be, given that they cover such a long time period?
Yeah, pipeline notices, again, outlining those opportunities coming over the next 18 months. They weren't necessarily needed for go live immediately, given there's a kind of reporting period for when they need to be published, which is a little bit further down the line. But yeah, they are coming very soon, and they'll be kind of for each procurement. So if you're a supplier, you'll be able to sort of look at what's in the, or easily search what's included in the pipeline, and then track that if there's a preliminary market engagement notice added later on, or a tender notice. I think it's fair to say that there will be the best estimates that the contracting authority has at the time. So if they go out in a pipeline notice to say they think they need a particular construction contract, for example, that's a great way to sort of log that, engage with the authority. But yeah, the contracting authority is not absolutely committed to doing those. Again, there might be a change in business reasons why they don't proceed with it, but it should still be the best estimate they have at that time.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sam. I think that's all the time we have for questions, unfortunately. Thank you so much, Deborah and Sam, for joining us today. I'm going to share this whole webinar, a recording of it, next week with everyone who signed up. You can also will be able to download it directly from our website if you have any colleagues who didn't sign up and would like to see this. Please feel free to get in touch with me directly or Tussell. That's support@tussell.com, and we can get back to you if you have any kind of burning questions. Sam and Deborah have both also given links of how you can get further help in their areas. So I think we will call it a day there. Thank you so much to everyone who attended. Have a lovely afternoon. And yeah, we'll send a recording of this webinar over to all of you shortly. All right.
Great. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thanks all. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks so much.